Heavenly Father, as we come before you, we thank you for the many blessings that you provide. We pray for our country, we pray for our state, and we pray for our nation. We pray for our world. During these differing times, let us find common bonds to work together. We pray for the leadership of this city, our mayor and council, and the citizens, because they are the ones that feed information to us to do the right thing. We pray for our staff, because without them, things just simply won't get done. These prayers we ask for your name, in your name, let us all say together, amen.
That's not clear.
You know, where it's coming from, it sounds like it's coming from our reserve.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on it? Is there any questions or comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 2 is approved. Item 3, there's one item for purchase order.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Item 4 is the police department and fire department.
Second.
Got a motion and a second for that grant. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's approved. Item 5.
Move for approval.
We got a
Question.
motion and a second. Any discussion?
Question,
Yes,
yes.
Mr. Gregory.
Yes, on number 7, it says that we're going to take 1.5 million from the general reserves. Can someone come up and explain that to council? Because we generally don't go into our reserves. We're on 5. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're on 5.
Okay. Sorry.
Well,
I thought we were on 7.
Jennifer. I did have one question on item 5. I didn't see it in that grant. Usually what happens, and maybe I'm not sure who is here that can answer the question, but normally when we get these grants, we have to fund these positions for a year or 2 or 3, and then it says we have no match, but then we have to come up with the whole thing. Is that the case with these? And if that's the case, how long does that last?
Yes, sir. This is the second year of this grant. It's a continuation. Last year was the first.
Come up to the mic, please, sir.
Yes, sir. This is the second year of this grant. It's a continuation from last year. We project a third year continuation as well next year, and then we absorb the 2 officers thereafter.
So at that point, do we have to hire this officer, or do we look at it again and we can either yes or no on it?
I believe we maintain the position, sir.
We have to, the idea is that you keep going
Yes, sir.
on our dollar.
Correct.
Okay, that was the,
I don't believe we're required to, Mayor, but I think we do. I have seen projections out for a couple of years following that as well for these positions. Yes, sir.
that was kind of what I was looking at. Thank you. All right,
Mayor?
yes,
Could
we're
we-
still on 5.
I know we are. Could we check that? Because I do think that as a part of the grant agreement, I thought that we needed to be in a position to keep those positions going forward. So could we check to make sure? Because I think that the grant agreement, I think he's right. The grant agreement is pretty clear.
Well, I know with the Cops Ahead grant that we are required thereafter. I'm not certain with this grant, and if we don't just apply for that annually anyway to keep those officers, but we'll double check.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Well, we need to know that.
Yes,
It says no match here, but that's a
match.
Okay, we got a motion and a second on item number 5. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's approved. Item 6 is the police department approved to accept the FY 17 VOCA award for...
Approval.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 6 is approved. Traffic and Transportation approval to submit an application matching funds for the 2017 Tiger Discretionary Grants Program to fund the design and construction of a standalone bridgeway adjacent to the existing Ashley River Bridge to connect West Ashley and downtown for non-motorized uses. This is a proposed city match of $1.5 million from the FY17 General Fund Reserve. The grant application is due October 16, 2017. What's the pleasure of council? Second. All right, we got a motion and a second. Mr. Gregory.
Question, I have a couple of questions. The first one.
Okay, so we are getting from the West Edge from the West Edge bond that we just got for $3 million. $1.5 million of that will pay back the general fund for expenditures that we've already spent. And so we'll use that, will go into the general fund reserves, and that is the $1.5 million.
Okay,
Does that make?
okay, yes.
Okay.
Second question. I went through the Tiger Grant application, notice of funding availability, and it's clear that this is something that is eligible, but it raised a few questions for me. One, I do see where bridges are eligible, and I wanted to know what would be the cost to replace the existing bridge with the bike lane and path for people to walk, et cetera, et cetera. Because in going through the NOFA, if you do sort of a joint application with the state, the county, and other jurisdictions, the amount that you can apply for is much higher. I think it's as high as 50 mil. The grant that we're applying for goes up to about 25 million. So just for clarity, I'd like to know what the cost would be to replace the existing bridge and put the bike path, walk path on that bridge. And is there a reason why we didn't apply for the larger grant to perhaps address that?
Who's, is that you, Keith?
Hey, everybody. So a couple reasons why. One, when the original vote went forth in county council meeting for the dedicated lane on the bridgeway that was voted down, a motion followed that for city and county to come together and look at the James Island Connector and Ashley River Bridgeway to see what solution we could come up with coming together on. And out of that meeting with both staffs together and advocacy groups came up with the different areas. We brought the consultants that originally were on the project HDR back in 2010, 2015, as well as Stantec to price out what those different options would be. The issue with the entire bridge is the fact that it's not even in SCDOT's 10-year plan. Nobody has been able, we've asked multiple times, but nobody has been able to give us even a sense of when that's even in the thought process of the State Department of Transportation. Also, the steering committee the county put together for the crosstown to study that area, they're thinking, 2050, like there's really no timeline on when that's coming in that process. But within this grant process, we're grateful that we've been able to get support. SCDOT secretaries in the midst of writing her letter. We have the county support, have city. Senator Graham just sent in their support today. Sanford, Kempson, the support in terms of the congressional delegation, and then also the support of other organizations have come
What's
through.
the grading on the existing bridge? A, B, C, D, or F?
Nobody has done that in years, and I think that's the part that was scary about that, because and part of the reason why we kind of moved away from the cantilever option, because if you hook onto that bridge, then you got to bring that Ashley River Bridge up to grade. And estimates in that are 30, 40, 50 plus million, just to bring it up to grade.
I still would like to know the grading on the existing bridge, and what...
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, still like to know the grading at some point on the existing bridge.
Okay.
I guess I understand the rationale for not trying to replace it totally, but
I mean, the other caveat, just to put in place, which we're grateful for, but also keeps us accountable, is different than the other Tiger Grant rounds. We have until 2020 to be project ready. The expectation that we would be project ready for a full bridgeway that would include the multi-use path. There's some questions around that possibility, but we know that with the studies that have already gone on, the work that's already gone forth to be able to make this crossing, that there's that opportunity to meet that particular deadline.
so are we, and I'm sorry, so are we suggesting that when we talked about the cantilever on that bridge, that we did not come up with some plans or something with regard to it? We've got to know something about the bridge if we're going to add something to it. We should know the grading of that bridge. Where does it stand? Should it be replaced? When should it be replaced? And whether or not what we're doing, okay, could buttress the replacement of the bridge. That's all I'm saying. If it costs $50 million to replace the bridge, this is going to cost us about 18 mil. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
This is going to cost us about 18 mil. Then we're at a $32 million shortfall, but we may be able to get, I don't want to belabor it, but I think you understand where I'm going with this. Of course, I'm going to support what you've submitted, but I just like to vote informed in terms of what are the other alternatives that we might have.
Understood. And we made the request of the secretary and otherwise to get those specifics. Again, it's not even in their 10-year plan. We don't even know if it's in 20 years out from now and otherwise. And I think the goal is, if we're going to be moving towards multimodalism and making sure that we have connectivity of all modes of transportation, we have to make sure that folk can make that in the safest way possible. And right now, that's not the case. And herein lies an opportunity where state, county, and city can be on par to be able to move towards the grant. Of course, we have no guarantees with the grant process, but we know that this is that next step to have that opportunity.
Last question. I mean, we know the serious flooding problem in the hospital complex.
Yes, sir.
And this bridge will land in that area, if I'm not mistaken. We could not make a connection or a tie at all to the drainage and the flooding issue in that area, which is severe, especially for our emergency operations in the medical complex.
Yeah, so I looked into that, and when we got the Tiger Grant, the last round, that first phase was specific to surface transportation improvements. That money was leveraged in order to do the drainage portion, which brought it up to 22, 23 million or otherwise. So, I mean, that's where the opportunity could go from that in terms of where that leveraging is. I think the thing for us is getting towards getting the grant process, and then we're open to where the options are from there.
I just don't want it to be a bridge over troubled waters. I just want to make sure.
Understood, sir. Understood. Understood. I know the song well.
All right, any other? Councilmember Waring.
Mr. Benjamin,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to vote for it. I'm satisfied with Ms. Wharton's explanation. I'm going to leave that bridge because hopefully we're going to vote for this. What were some of the conversations with the James Island Connector? Are there any plans to, in effect, do both?
So we looked at, there's two options that we looked at. We looked at what a cantilevered system would be for the entire portion of the James Island Connector, which is extremely expensive. It's in the range of $50 million just for a cantilevered system. One of the other options that we looked at was completion of the West Ashley Greenway and then complete the Greenway and then have a two-way bike ped trail that would connect onto the side of the connector for that short portion and possibly drop down where the marina is, similar to places like we looked at Jacksonville and some other places where if you've been to a large stadium where they have the zigzag walking path down, something like that would come down and land in that Lockwood portion. I think the things that kind of put a price tag on it, that was in the range of about $13 million. The two problems with that are, one, where exactly to land. To the grade level. So one of the things we were concerned about is if we're going to be providing this type of pathway, one, how do we make sure it's safe? Two, how do we make sure that it's an option for whoever, no matter what walk level, ADA, bike level they might be, they bike for the first time in 20 years or they're, a cyclist for however long that's there. So that grade level is pretty high. So there were some questions about what that would look like, what that drop down would be. And if there are, we don't know if county is looking at how to unwrap that circle area near the connector, would that infer with that potential project there? But it was definitely looked at price-wise.
Is the grade level on that higher than the Ravenel Bridge?
Well, you start low,
Right.
and then the grade level progressively gets up. If you're coming from Lockwood and B to get onto the connector, like that grade level is pretty high, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but that grade level is pretty high. So we were just thinking about what that concern was there. But I think one of the things that we made mention of at the county council meeting is if there is an opportunity to be able to get both done in the future, that we want to move in that particular regard.
Mr. Mayor, or you through, Keith? Okay, Mr. Mayor?
I just wanted to commend both the city and the county for not putting their heads together around the solution to this challenge and for our community for some years, particularly thank our staff, our city staff. We kind of got a group of folks together led by Mr. Benjamin and it's called our Tiger Team. The football fan everywhere was the Tiger Man. And the window to put together this application was very short, and it's a big task, including economic analysis, impact from the project, and they've done a remarkable job putting together this application, but I want to commend them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to make one mention. We discussed this in traffic and transportation.
Yes, sir.
And it occurred to me after that meeting that as you were planning the peninsula side of the bridge, of this bridge, and you have this connection between the city marina and Bristol, it seems to me that on the other side of the bridge, on the West Ashley side,
Yes, sir.
if you figured out how to put a pathway, a wood bridge or something under that, just like you did from the Highway 61 over to the other place, it would make that really easy to get on that bikeway. And because my fear is that we're going to spend $18 million and everybody's going to be driving down the World War I bridge still. That's my fear. So I just throw that out there as something you might want to look at in terms of the design, because it wasn't on that map. But anyway, thank you, and I agree with what the mayor said.
Yes, sir.
Putting this together. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, Mr. White?
What Councilman Gregory brings up a good point. I presume we haven't really done any engineering yet and study of the bridge to determine if, in fact, we can feasibly do this. This is sort of more theoretical at this point. I'm assuming that we haven't actually had an engineer go out and know that we can retrofit it, that it's safe enough to do. And
So we're not retrofitting the existing bridge. We're doing a full standalone. So the price point that we've asked for, that we're going to be requesting of through the Tiger Grant and the match dollars that are going to a full standalone with its own lift. Nothing's going to be touching the bascule at all. So it wouldn't be touching the bridge. And I think a part of that was one, playing into the connectivity issue, but also to circumvent if it does come up to the case that that bridge would have to be removed, that we wouldn't be infringing on that particular project. When we've brought this up with other different entities, one of the biggest questions was, well, if we go ahead and give you X, Y, and Z amount of money to do a cantilever system on the existing bridgeway, and we decide we want to replace that bridge, what happens to those dollars that went to that system? So we moved away from that process.
that was my second question. So in the event that that bridge, when it does get replaced, this will still be active and functional?
Yes, sir.
It's all been planned through?
That's what the goal is, yes. Even the lift span in the middle portion, part of that was because bascules are very expensive. So as we're moving from touching that bascule at all, it would have its own lift span in the mid portion.
Thank you.
Yes, Peter. Shay.
Thank you. I'm very excited about where we are with this project, and I want to echo the mayor's comments about commending everyone for pitching in and seeing the vision of this standalone. But I also want to echo what the chairman just mentioned about if there's somehow to tie in the 61, I guess it's a 61, or the Old Town section of the World War I bridge side to this, it would be a big help, because there's a lot of folks who are coming across the World War I bridge to that area. So if there is a possibility, as y'all are going through this design phase, to somehow tie that in, that would be a big help. When I was able to run, and I ran across both the James Island Connector Bridge and the Cooper River Bridge, it is a huge difference on that, what's the word I'm looking for? The
Agreed.
yeah, the grade of that. And so I never thought that was a real feasible option anyhow. So I'm glad that we're where we are with this thing, and hope we get this thing passed today. And thank you for all the hard work.
Yes, sir.
Anything else, Mr. Ware?
I have to say this. Again, I'm voting for this, and since we're on multi-pass, and we did bring up the World War I bridge. The lanes on the Legree Bridge are 10 feet wide.
Yes, sir.
The lanes on the World War I bridge is 11 feet 1 inch wide. And the reason I know that is I got out there 5 o'clock in the morning and I measured it myself. If the lanes on the World War I bridge were to, if you're coming from town West Ashley, were to shift 1 foot to the left, we would at least make it safer on the World War I bridge, because even with this bridge, people still going to use the World War I bridge. Why don't we make it safer? That's all I'm saying. Instead of having a 4.5 foot pathway, we should have almost an 8 foot pathway, 7.5, maybe 7 foot 9, 10 inches. If we had this bridge, because the truth about it, if somebody's coming down St. Andrews Boulevard, coming from Old Town Road or St. Andrews Boulevard, they're not going to go up Wesley Drive and cut across Folly and even come on this bridge if it's on the side of the Legree Bridge. My point is, people are using the World War I bridge every day, and we don't do anything to make it safer. And we do have, you're talking about changing stripes. That's what we're talking about, changing stripes on the lane. And I think there's an opportunity to do both. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement that if we're going to be creating these opportunities, then we need to be creating it in both ways. I think the conundrum is that our city definition of measurement of success for transportation differs from our other agency connections, right? So if we're we might be talking about multimodalism, we might be talking about safe accessibility of all modes, and that might be different in other places. So I think that's what part of my job is to advocate in that regard for us to make that shift so we can make sure that that safety is there. I think the other piece is that we actually, and we had Chair Seekings a part of it, we had a charrette with the cities of Vancouver and New York who actually took a look at this entire project and gave us suggestions based off of the work that they were able to do, both on bridgeways and connected to bridgeways. And the big issue that we're definitely going to have to work on in going about this process is the intersections on both sides. If we can't get those together, then it's not going to be efficient for the crossway for the bridge, and that's the biggest conundrum. What we've heard over and over again is somebody might enjoy themselves while they're on the particular piece of infrastructure, but if it's dangerous for them to get on, dangerous for them to get off, they're not going to use it. So those are the pieces that we have to make sure are together.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Benjamin.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All those in favor of item number 7 signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item 7 is approved. Item 8 is the mayor's approval. Got a motion, a second on item 8. Any discussion on that item? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? 8 is approved. 9 is GIS. This is approval to submit an application. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Mayor. Good, thank you. Any other discussions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item 10 is capital, Parks Capital Projects, approval of professional service contract amount of $240. Got a motion, a second on that item dealing with the parking study. Any comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, I also wanted to just point out that this contract allows us to really look after one of the great assets of our city is our parking lot, physical assets. And we
Any other comments or questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item 10 is approved. Item 11 is again, Parks Capital Projects, the approval of construct. Got a motion and a second on this item. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's approved. Item 12 is the public. Approval. Got a motion and a second on that contract. Any comments, questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. 13, approval of change order amount. Second. Got a motion and a second on 13. Any discussion or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? 13 is approved. Item 14 is public service. Got a motion and a second. Mr. Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item is, I guess, the final phase 3 of the Market Street Drainage Project. And this is what we're actually going to see up at the surface. And I know it's gone through a number of changes, nothing major, but here's another change order. Is there an updated schematic somewhere that we can see to take a look at what it's actually going to look like at the surface around the market and all that? Just out of curiosity, where we are with all this.
Mr. Chairman, I can address it.
Okay, go ahead. Keep your seat, Lauren.
That there is an updated schematic which we'd be happy to share.
Right.
And one of the holdups of this project has been to get the easements in place for the placement of, what do they call them? The generator, not generators, for the electrical infrastructure for SCNG. And that's finally all been resolved as of about a month or two ago. SCNG is now doing the engineering that they said they had to wait until they had the easements for. And so when that's done, we can finally move forward with this project.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's one of the issues is, I think you're talking about the transformers for the electrical delivery along there. And as you know, backing up to the market going north through Ansonboro as a part of the Gilliard deal is putting all power underground, and there was that sort of void between Pinckney Street and the market where we actually didn't engineer putting the lines underground. There was going to actually be a block that was just not underground. So I'm interested to see how that all got worked out in this streetscaping project, because the transformers for the undergrounding on the south end are going to have to be along that market. So long time in coming, just like to see how that's all going to get put together. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
We're on 14, right? Yeah.
14, yes.
No, we're on 15. Don't go backwards.
Can someone tell me what's in the drainage fund? In the drainage fund, and whether or not I can get some of that between some of the ditches on the island?
I can get the information for you. I can't tell you right now how much it is, but I can get it for you.
Any other comments or questions? All those in favor of item 14 say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 14 is approved. 15 is a public service approval of the spring fish. Second. Got a motion and a second on that item. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's approved. Item 16 is our real estate committee report. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Committee on Real Estate met yesterday, October 9th, 3:30 here at City Hall. We heard a number of items. Item A was a memorandum of agreement between the city and Low Country Lowline. That also included a purchase and sale agreement between the city and Low Country Lowline for $2.55 million for about 10.98 acres. We also heard an item for the purchase of parcel of land off of F Street for $678,000 between the city and Norfolk Southern Railway. We also heard an item for purchase and sale agreement between the city and Norfolk Southern Railway for a parcel off Mount Pleasant Street for $1.617200. And then finally we had two annexations, 7 Riverdale Drive and 1320 North Edgewater Drive. All of those items were approved unanimously, and I'll move for the adoption.
Second.
Second. Motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Councilmember Lewis.
I know this project is a long way from getting plans and getting completed. But just remember, you got H and F Street back there, which is a neighborhood between King and a lot of restaurants right now. I don't know how we're gonna separate this low-lying project from that neighborhood, but just take it in mind that the people that live on those two streets back there, the majority of those houses are bought from people who bought from Habitat. So we need to take a look at, because this is gonna be multi-millions of dollars project that's gonna go back there. How are we gonna separate the low line from the neighborhood to make sure that we don't drive those people property taxes up, because it's a public-private partnership. So the city has something to do with it. So we need to look at what we might have done 10 or 12 years in the neck area when Magnolia bought all that property and they did some things to protect the people in Rosemount. So I think we need to take back a look at that and see what we can do to protect those people on those two little streets back there. When we put this big project, I guess, right next door to them. So it's something that we need to do some research on and take a look at it. The Magnolia project and the state DOT and all them, they worked out something to kind of protect those people in the Rosemont area. So we need to make sure that we look at that and see what we can do to protect those two little streets, because they're being squeezed up now with all the restaurants along King Street. Leon's and Little Jack's, and another one just opened up right there, and they got two little streets right behind them, between them and the railroad tracks. So let's think about the citizens that live back there, especially the lower income citizens, people that are, those houses, most of them were built by Habitat for Humanity. So we want to protect them and make sure that that neighborhood is continue to be a neighborhood and they're not going to be forced out by the cost of this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
That's what some of the things I was
Mayor, I'll call on you after.
That's what some of the things I was going to ask the city to look into, because that's part of the district, that I represent too. Councilman Lewis had represented previously, but now it's over to me, so I was going to ask that same question, because they have a lot of problems in there. We don't want to squeeze them out per se. We have to make sure that we protect them at all costs, that what we are doing. And so that's one of the things I was looking at too, was going to ask. But since he already asked, I don't have to go back and go through the same thing again.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
And I wanted to recognize a few of the friends that are here this evening, because they've helped make this transformative proposal possible, and that's the Friends of the Lowline, and represented here tonight by Mike and Jenny Mesner and Andy Gowder, and I think I saw Harry Lassane is on their board, Winslow Hasty, and, well, that's another category. He's not on their board, but part of what made this proposal to you as affordable is that Norfolk Southern agreed to break this into a number of smaller transactions, and then the Friends, the board, and other folks that they have contacted have agreed to charitably give the city, in effect, just over $2.5 million to help pay for the right-of-way, and that includes folks like Justin Ferreira, who's with us this evening, and Ron Owens with the Post and Courier, and there are others who will be contributing to that effort. So I wanted to recognize them and thank them, because the improvements for quality of life in this part of the city will be demonstrable. The connectivity that will be achieved particularly for pedestrians and bikers in our city will be remarkable. And we will tie in drainage improvements along with the ownership of this property, because some of you know that the railroad put in 200 years ago was put on high ground, and then they built it up a little bit. I guess they didn't want the locomotives to run through flooded areas. And so it created almost a dam, and there's a sizable part of our city that would naturally drain over to the New Market Creek area that basically is prevented to do so because of the geography of the lowline. So our ownership of that will help achieve some solutions there. And kind of as an adjunct from our discussion yesterday, I've asked city staff to proceed not just with a grant application that City Council approved a couple of months ago for a study, for a project design of the drainage solution we need for King and Hugh G. Street, that rather that be a grant application, that we proceed with the RFP in order to get a design of a solution to that flooding issue. And owning the low line will help us accomplish that. And so that brought up the matter of, well, if we hadn't done the design on that drainage solution yet, why should we proceed with the streetscape improvements just yet on Hugh G. Street? You know, get the drainage done first, and then we'll make it look pretty. And Councilmember Waring had the suggestion just yesterday that perhaps we ask to redirect some dollars, I think it's over $2 million, that is dedicated to that Hugh G. Street improvement project, and ask that it be used for something that's shovel-ready right now, which is affordable housing. So I've looked into that matter just today, Councilmember Waring. I think it's a good idea. They may say no, but at least we can ask and help redirect that money to help both drainage and affordable housing. So my hat's off to all the folks with the Friends and the donors. I think there's going to be a multitude of benefits from this project, and a great thing for the city. Regarding property values, Councilmember Lewis, you know, what has happened since the times you mentioned was that the state law has at least put in place, as long as you continue to own your home, you know, there are limits to the increase in property value. So there's some protection now that didn't exist, you know, 10 or 15 years ago and before that. What they did in the Magnolia development for the Rosemont area was have a fund so that if citizens whose property taxes rose dramatically, which really shouldn't be allowed by state law now, that they would be able to apply for some property tax relief in order to cover their increased property tax bills. I'm certainly open to looking at that.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, when this first came about, we were talking about the low line, and I had my reservation about it, because all of that parcel is the district I represent. And after we came with a different conversation about it and the changes that were made, and that's when I made the change that I would support it. Because in the beginning I had my reservation and I spoke to the mayor about it, and I kind of tell him my reservation, what I had pertaining to it. And after the changes was made and things was taken out of it, and we reduced the price so far as the city is concerned, because I was looking strictly at what was going to be cost to our taxpayers, because we would have to pay it back. So I wanted to make sure that even the low-line organization, if you may, was coming up with this money, that the city don't have to pay all this money themselves. And I was adamant about that, and I spoke to the mayor about it. So after the changes came, and I started looking at the different prices wise, and I said, okay, this might work. And I said, would it be a beautiful idea what they're doing with the low line? And I have a problem with that. The only thing I was problem with making sure that someone else is coming to the table beside the city of Charleston, and beside repaying all the money out and making sure we get the drainage done and things like that, because that's my two main priority sitting here, is drainage and housing, strictly. And other things I look at, but I don't want to put the horse before the cart. I want to make sure that we solve some of these problems that we had all the time. And that's what I was telling, I do it to the mayor and I do it to the staff.
Mr. Mitchell, I just want to make one thing, and I want to ask our legal staff. Yesterday at the Real Estate Committee, my reading of that memorandum of agreement, there was no mention at all that the low line could be used specific or for drainage. It had a whole lot of other uses, but it did not mention the word drainage anywhere in the document. And our recommendation to the committee is that language be added to that memorandum of understanding or agreement. I don't know whether we got a new one tonight and that language on it, but Ms. Cantwell can address that.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this afternoon, Mr. Queenie sent you a red line version of the memorandum of understanding between the city and the Friends, and it does now specifically allow for drainage improvements along with park improvements, and it does also address not just the city's sole discretion on the amount of money that we spend on the improvements, but the timing of them.
Thank you.
And I would like to also thank you and the committee for bringing that up at the real estate committee meeting, because it was brought up and that was mentioned and that was included into it, and I heard about that on early yesterday or today, that this was happening and that it was when something that you brought up, and I said I wanted to thank you for doing that, because all those things was the things that I was thinking about and had a reservation about.
Well, and I just want to be sure that we're voting on this red line and not the one that we approved yesterday at the committee meeting. So, Mr. Gregory and then Mr. White.
Yeah, question for the mayor. Mayor, you mentioned that we're going to move forward to try to request the $2 million that we got mitigation with the bridge site back. But isn't there an additional $1.5 million that we have for King, UG between King and Meeting in our TIF? Wouldn't that give us another 1.5 to go directly toward the Hugie drainage? You mentioned the 2 mil, but we also had one, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, we had 1.5 million. And that's, I guess that's the Gateway TIF?
No, I believe that's the Cooper River.
Cooper River, right.
And so we discussed that in Community Development Committee, but when it came to council last meeting, we decided that we would have a workshop in order to discuss those proposed projects in greater detail.
Okay.
And that's scheduled for next Thursday, I believe, of next week.
Okay, so that's a more appropriate time.
You're absolutely right. We can dedicate part of that $12 million to go, once we have the design, to go to this drainage project.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I did want to just get some quick clarity from Campbell if I can. And this question had come up after we yesterday. It was confirmed that there was some question about title and specific. Yesterday it was identified that we would be able to in fact get the title insurance on this property. The question came up after the fact, and just wanted to clarify that title insurance is not for a limited time, but it does in fact run for as long as we have ownership of the property?
It will be a policy that will protect the city for the life of its ownership of the land for the full amount of the purchase price that we pay. And that is a contingency of closing. And as I told the committee yesterday, we've continued to dig, and with some creative thinking, we feel confident we'll be able to do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, Mr. Regal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to assure Councilman Gregory, Lewis, and Mitchell, it was intriguing to me, and I serve on the Real Estate Committee, which we had a very favorable vote last night, yesterday, is that a railroad causes possibly some of the flooding, some of the drainage issues right through the middle of that area. It was intriguing to me because, as you all know, District 10, Church Creek Drainage Plaza. And there's some suspicions that a railroad out there causes similar situations. But what I wanted to assure you was the committee had a really very lengthy discussion and a good discussion about the drainage issues. And of course, then we roped in the affordable housing as it should be. But my compliments to Councilman Waring and Councilman Moody, because they come up with some terrific ideas that the committee supported last night. So I'm obviously going to support this here in Ways and Means and Council, but I wanted to get that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regal. Yes, Mr. Lewis.
First, I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being so knowledgeable about the Rosemount and the deal that they worked out, because that's important to me and that's important to the city. I want to thank Mr. Knapp, Mark Knapp, because he took me around to some of these drainage about 16 years ago. And one of the drainage that we discussed was the New Market Creek. And I've been preaching that in here for years. But the city and staff has been turning a deaf ear to the New Market Creek. But all of a sudden now, we want to do this big development. So now we know about New Market Creek. We know where the problem at that would solve this big public safety hazard on King and Hugie Street that I've been crying about for years. But it seemed like the city couldn't see it, couldn't understand it, till we want to do a project called the Low Line. So I hope to God that y'all will go ahead and get this drainage problem solved for the Hugie and King before somebody dies. And while you're looking at it, the Low Line It's going to run into Line Street. We have the same problem on Line Street because the DOT created a problem up there 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm told now that the engineer that worked on that area is no longer with the DOT. We got some serious public safety problems in this city when it comes to water, and I hope it don't take another 20 years to get it solved. But somebody said, well, we need another low line. Let's solve this problem on Line and King. Let's get these problems solved so people can be driving safely through the city. I thank you, low line. I've been preaching and preaching and preaching and crying and all for years about this new Market Creek. Finally, I think I had something sitting on the shelf with the dust on it, and finally they come up with the word New Market Creek. So I hope we get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Ware?
My compliments to everybody. I just want everybody to know that that's Councilman Lewis's way of singing Kumbaya. But, but just in case, Mr. Mayor, we missed anybody, I know we kind of glossed over our staff, but I mean, this to me, and I think to many in the room, this is maybe not as many millions, but just as unique as the public-private partnership put together on the Gilliard. So this could be a new standard moving forward. Is there any way we can ask the people to stand who had anything to do with this directly or indirectly, in particular from the private sector side?
Low line or whatever? All right, before you get too big, let's vote on this. And then we might ask you to stand again. Yeah, we want to put on the record that the motion for item A as amended.
Amended.
Yeah. So with that, we got a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. That's the end of Ways and Means. Adjourned.